Thanks so much, Deborah. Thanks so much, Savas. It's really quite scary, this. You go a long way back. I just want to say thank you for having me here today. To the young person from Bude, Cornwall, who had to take her GCSE maths 3 times before passing and got 5 rejections out of 5 on their UCAS application, it means an awful lot to be here. As Savas said, I'm the MD of Ubisoft Reflections and Leamington, a role I've had for the last 3 years. Now, the majority of my career has been in television, wall to wall, most recently at the BBC, first in public service, overseeing both independent production and in-house production, both operationally and commercially. And then in 2016, I was part of the team that decided to spin off BBC Production into a commercial entity into its own right at BBC Studios. I'm loving seeing the programmes that I was involved with at inception come to fruition from afar, from Prehistoric Planet on Apple to Planet Earth 3 on the BBC and The Americas with Tom Hanks on NBC. My most recent role at BBC Studios was across all of our output. So yes, that's including EastEnders, Good Omens, Strictly, The Surgeon's Cut on Netflix, Top Gear and much, much more. Literally thousands of hours of television every year. So the approach from Ubisoft came as a complete surprise. And I have to admit that my experience of the sector was limited to watching my son play Call of Duty and me playing Toon Blast on the train. Don't tell anybody outside of this room, please. It's embarrassing. I couldn't quite understand how I could bring any value. And yet it was really intriguing. This comparatively young, rapidly expanding, ever-changing sector was fascinating and facing many of the same challenges as TV. A crowded market, competition for player time, shift to a subscription business model, skills shortages, lack of diversity in the workforce, to name just a few. It also had had a rough couple of years. The culture inspired at the frontiers of software development was not as inclusive as it could be. At Ubisoft, women make up just 21% of our production workforce. And across the industry, COVID had taken its toll on mental health and on well-being. And the sheer complexity of video game production meant that people often felt disillusioned. So when they offered me the job, I said yes, because I love a challenge. Unfortunately, I can say I have not regretted the move for one moment, not least because quite a lot of people under the age of 30 now think I'm quite cool, whereas my mother thinks she just doesn't know what I'm doing. She's really confused, but there we go. She's less impressed. Now, all I knew, as I said, about video games was that my son played with his mates. I'd been a bystander. He was ridiculously excited by my new job and quickly set about educating me. So I first played Grow Up, Grow Home, a Reflections title made here in Newcastle. Then a small indie game called Firewatch that he figured I could actually complete. I spent a lot of time in a tree looking at my feet and got very frustrated by my lack of hand-eye coordination. But I slowly progressed to Assassin's Creed, Stray, The Ghost of Tsushima, and the amazing Last of Us 2. And I have to say that I was absolutely blown away by the breadth and depth of creativity and storytelling that I discovered. I had thought of games as first-person shooters, but learnt that they were so much more. Every day since has been an enormous learning curve, and I remain stunned at the complexity of what we do and the brilliance of our teams at both Reflections and Leamington. I would say this, but Ubisoft makes extraordinary games. The steps we take to ensure the immersion of our players into a living, breathing world are incredible. In my first few weeks, I was asked to sign off an audio recording session of some gunshots in France. So I asked the question why it couldn't be recorded in the UK, and I was told that we needed to capture the actual guns in the actual locations that they would actually have been shot at, and that the atmospheric differences in the UK would be apparent. Now, this may sound completely mad, and it did to me, But it's the same attention to detail that caused the historian David Olusoga to tell me that Assassin's Creed Valhalla was one of the most authentic worlds he had ever seen. It was a history lesson in 9th century Anglo-Saxon England. Assassin's Creed Mirage, their recreation of 9th century Baghdad, is so accurate that it made another historian cry, with pleasure, I should add, not despair. This historical accuracy is celebrated in educational resources borne out by the Assassin's Creed titles. The Discovery Tours are a series of dedicated games that let players freely roam in ancient Greece, ancient Egypt, and the Viking Age to learn more about their history and daily life, aimed at students, teachers, non-gamers, and featuring guided tours and stories curated by historians and experts. Recently, there's been some accusations of wokery for wanting to tell a story about a black samurai in the forthcoming Assassin's Creed Shadows. There's also a female Japanese shinobi character, but everyone seems to have forgotten her. I'm sure when Shakespeare wrote Othello, there were those who questioned the characters. The magic of storytelling, as I'm going to go on and say, is the juxtaposition of different people and different emotions and ambitions. According to academic Christopher Booker, there are only 7 basic plots in any story. It's the way you tell them that matters. If you want to entertain, then you need to surprise and challenge too. So as I said, I have learnt that making video games is hard. We have our own proprietary engines and are often building the engine and making the game all at the same time. The gaming engine, as I'm sure many of you are aware, is a software development environment, also referred to as game architecture or a game framework, with settings and configurations that optimize and simplify development across a variety of programming languages. So they would include, for example, they would include 2D or 3D graphics, a physics engine that stimulates real-world activities, and artificial intelligence that automatically responds to players' actions. Many games producers license third-party engines like Unity or Unreal, benefiting from the learnings of literally thousands of upgrades a year. Ubisoft uses its own engines to create a point of difference in the look, feel, and performance of a game. Finding unique and compelling gameplay that will drive retention for years, sometimes up to 10 years, is really difficult. And the market is full of highly successful titles that just eat up player time. Yes, I consider myself to be so fortunate to be invited into this world, to work with an incredible team and a global company with the most popular form of entertainment in the world, where there is such enormous potential to develop and grow. But it has to be said, I'm quite unusual. Moving into the video games sector from another one is not that common, but I'll come on to that. Today I'm going to talk about my 3 C's. Now, in video games, the 3 C's are the core pillars of a player experience. So they are camera, character, and controls. They are what defines the feel of a game. But I'm going to talk about my own 3 C's, and they are creativity, change, and culture. I'll talk a little bit about how I believe creativity relies on difference, how commerciality can drive creativity, and how creative cultures are made and not born. To be clear, I don't think that media or entertainment businesses have a monopoly on creativity. I'd argue that any organisation with a remit to innovate is fundamentally creative. Now, each business that I've worked at has been very different, but common threads exist. One of them is a tendency to focus on PLU, or people like us, a phrase I first heard years back, referring to a potential candidate for a job. I asked a colleague how the interview had gone, and she replied, "Great, the candidate is really PLU." What did it mean? Well, it means people who think like us, people who look like us, people who talk like us, and sound like us. It has to be said that I've had jobs where I didn't actually feel like I was a person like them either. At the BBC, I hadn't been to a Russell Group university, and in meetings, people used literary and classical references that went right over my head. My comprehensive small-town education and rather rubbish A-level results felt out of place. It was a long time before I felt like I belonged. The games sector, I would argue, has many of the same issues. People like us are the teams who have shipped 5 games together, who've been working in a core team, that core production team, for 20 years, who went to the same universities. I would argue that people like us are the death knell of innovation and creativity if we're not careful. Now, the cultural sector is not renowned for the diversity of its workforce. In TV, women and people from minority ethnic groups are well presented as a whole. However, this is not the case at senior levels, where the numbers of women, TV 42% and radio 36%, and the people from minority ethnic groups, TV 13% and radio 7%, are below working population averages of 48% and 14% respectively. In the game sector, 39% of the workforce are under 30, but only 30% are women. And there's a significant gender pay gap, 17.1% compared to the UK average of 7.1%. And yet, as of June 2023, there were approximately 39.9 million gamers in the UK across all mediums. Of this figure, 47% of game users are female compared to 53% male. When you consider the importance of the creative sector in the UK, I think, if you look at it, the UK is the second largest video games market in Europe and the 6th worldwide, worth 7.82 billion in 2023, and TV production, where UK producers have established themselves as global powerhouses, worth 3.61 billion in 2023. You could argue that it doesn't matter, that we've done fine with our predominantly white, middle-aged, middle-class workforce. Why change? I would argue that creative businesses that become detached from their audiences, players, customers, ultimately lose their way. We can see the impact of existing in an echo chamber in our everyday lives. Now, from a personal perspective, the biggest lesson I have learnt in my career is the value of the contribution of people who think differently to me. I'm energetic, opinionated, and noisy, and I don't think you'd want a room full of people like me. So I believe that creativity in all its guises requires different voices. Innovation lives and breathes through the friction of difference and in a real connection with your consumer, whether player, viewer, or customer. Today I'm going to talk about the value of having different voices, whether that's people of different genders, ages, ethnicities, or geographies, people whose voices are different. As Matthew Syed says in Rebel Ideas, think how comforting it is to be surrounded by people who think the same way, who mirror our perspectives, who confirm our prejudices. It makes us feel smarter. It validates our worldview. These dangers are as ancient as mankind itself. And yet he states that groups that contain diverse views have a huge, often decisive advantage. If you haven't read Rebel Ideas, then I would really recommend it. It's an excellent book and a really good read. So yes, diversity makes a difference to the bottom line. A Gartner study revealed that highly inclusive environments can improve team performance by up to 30%. Another McKinsey study suggested that companies with the most diversity outperform those with the least by 36% in profitability. And yet most creative businesses are strictly hierarchical, with those in decision-making roles being older and often male. But 49% of the UK population is under 40. Millennials and Gen Zs are the two generations with the most expendable income in the market for the next 25 years. Those are the customers we need to cater to. In this era, when the user controls their entire suite of services in the remote control in their pocket, or you have to put them at the center of everything, including the decision-making process. To quote Evan Shapiro, an excellent media commentator and worth Googling, you have to put people in the room who are younger, who are in the demographic of the majority, which means people under 40. But they also have to come from different economic strata and include people who might not always be able to afford every subscription product out there. He adds, the other major issue we have in the media ecosystem, for generations, all we've done is hire our nieces and nephews. You get confirmation bias. genetic level confirmation bias. You all have the same chin. It's a real problem. Sorry, but that was Evan, not me. So an exception to the rule, I would argue, is the transformation of the New York Times. Former CEO Mark Thompson and an ex-BBC colleague, who is no youngster himself, it has to be said, transformed the Times from a family-led, advertising-dependent paper product delivered by diesel truck into one of the best digital subscription products in the world. And he did it in less than a decade. He said that the cultural shift was more important than the business model shift. He had to give permission to 20 and 30-something project and product managers to make decisions. They didn't have to run everything to the CEO's office or to the family's office. That was crucially important. And it's not just about hearing the voices of young people. It's about hearing from all generations. I now find myself in a world where everyone thinks differently to me, and I can testify to the value that that brings. According to the Harvard Business Review, by the end of this decade, at least 35 countries will have more than 1 out of 5 people over the age of 65, a first in the history of the world. However, this is already the case across Europe, as well as in some of the largest economies in Asia, including South Korea, Japan, and Singapore. By 2034, older adults over 65 will outnumber those under 18 in nearly all of those places too. But according to data from the Office of National Statistics, in November to January 2023, 8.9 million people aged 16 to 64 were economically inactive. That's about 21% of those, and the vast majority were older people. In its inquiry on economic inactivity, the House of Lords Economic Affairs Committee highlighted that rising inactivity can pose serious challenges. It may lead to higher inflation as employers raise wages to attract worker growth by constraining output, and worsen public finances through lower tax receipts. Now, this doesn't mean that we should tolerate the old hierarchical age business stereotype that we have had so long. But it does mean that we should respect the contributions of all. According to research, baby boomers like clear goals and objectives and long-term plans. Gen X like clear and consistent feedback and like to meet face-to-face. Millennials look for community in the workplace and value flexibility and autonomy. And Gen Zs prioritize personal over the corporate, and they really value their independence. We need to each respect each other so that if you're managing someone 20 years your senior, you know how to do that and to ensure that they feel they belong. The fact is that great minds don't think alike. When we think of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, we often think of race, gender, age, and sexual orientation. But there is also diversity in the way people think, encompassing autism, ADHD, dyslexia, and OCD, amongst others. Difference of thought brings unique strength and perspectives and can strengthen and enhance an organisation. And it's about geography and class too, hearing voices from all backgrounds. To quote Lisa Nandy, who's the Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport on the subject of TV just last week, if you aren't commissioning content from every part of the country, towns and villages, as well as major cities, why not? If you bus people in rather than recruit locally, stop it. Talent is everywhere, opportunity is not. And if you've moved jobs and people and content, but the heads of departments are still in London, do something about it. 8% is the proportion of working class people working in TV. 23% is the proportion of commissions made in companies based outside of London. 30% is the fall in media trust over the last decade. Arguably, that fall evidences the importance of authenticity, a workforce who reflects the audience it seeks to reach. A diverse and active workforce can improve operational efficiency, enhance innovation and creativity, and grow the bottom line. A workplace that ensures everyone feels they belong is vital. Over the last few years, there has been a shift away from passionately pursuing inclusivity in the workplace. Amidst claims of wokery and political correctness gone mad, there is a very clear economic rationale to continue to pursue diverse workforce as well as a clear ethical one. Which brings me to my second C, change. At Ubisoft, we've been through a lot of change. In fact, we still are. All organisations actually are. But when I first arrived at the BBC, it was facing something of a crisis. The BBC's own producers, in-house production, were failing to win commissions at the time, and they weren't allowed by law to make television programmes for anyone other than the BBC. And yet they struggled to think of the buyer as customer because they were all part of the same organisation. The relationship between customer, in this instance BBC commissioners, and sellers, in-house production, was really screwed. Independent producers, able to make for anyone, were hoovering up business from the BBC. BBC in-house had become quite entitled and really didn't know how to sell. They were family after all, so why should they? What's more, if their colleagues didn't commission the programme, then it had nowhere to go but into the bin. So the trick was to spend time and money coming up with an idea and hold off pitching it because it might then just never get anywhere. There wasn't any jeopardy. And what's more, a commissioner would never be shown up having another channel airing a hit that they'd failed to buy and had missed. So the producer had nothing to lose and everything to gain. So I tried to instigate change. I had to work with commissioning and production and to mend the relationship and to introduce some commercial awareness about the benefits of owned intellectual property and about the benefits of commissioning in-house. But I really failed. It was really hard. Editorial supremacy won out. There was no P&L for the buyer. After all, there was no bottom line, literally. So during my time at the BBC, there was a track record of failed transformations, as there are in most organisations. All of them had code names, Project King and Project Green, etc. And many consultants had presented many PowerPoint presentations mapping out change, only to fail. According to McKinsey's research on transformations, the BBC really is not alone. Success is absolutely the exception, not the rule. In a recent survey, they conducted that less than 1/3 of respondents, all of whom had been part of a transformation in the last 5 years, said their company's transformations had been successful at both improving organisational performance and sustaining those performances over time. And even companies with successful transformations didn't always capture the full financial benefits of those efforts. Back to the BBC and an underperforming in-house production function. I worked as part of the team who brought about a huge transformation. After much thought, we all together made this decision to make in-house production commercial, to create a standalone commercial entity free to operate in the market and with no guaranteed custom from the BBC. And to do this from a standing start, from scratch. It was an enormous feat to take 4,000 public servants and ask them to identify a customer out in the market and sell. One producer admitted to me to not having made a programme for another channel other than the BBC since the Falklands War. It was probably the most seismic shift the BBC had ever met. In the factual teams that I oversaw, I started out with 11 different departments. Genre-led and sounding like GCSE subjects, literally, religion, ethics, history and science. And we repurposed them into 6 business units, each with their own P&L, each led by a partnership of editorial and business leaders. We focused on the market and we focused on the opportunities. We created a clear link between spend and return. We gave each clear accountability for their business. When they asked how much they could spend, the answer was always, how much can you afford? I believe that the clarity of a commercial objective, a bottom line, drove our creative teams to think of their customers first, to frame their ideas within a customer brand and expectation, and to use the tension of multiple customers to hone their creativity and to innovate. And we succeeded. We achieved sales to all the target platforms and broadcasters that we'd set out to do, and we achieved revenue in excess of our targets. So why did we succeed on this mission when they had failed and we had failed so often previously? I'd say for 4 reasons. We set fact-based high aspirations. We knew who we wanted to work with in the world and why. We set clear, deliverable and ambitious targets. we clearly articulated why we had to change. We had our burning platform. We were making less programs every year. It wasn't about the bottom line. It wasn't about making money. It was a compelling reason to explain why our teams should do things differently. We executed well. We were laser focused in the outcomes. We acted quickly and made difficult decisions early. We lost a significant percentage of the workforce. It was painful, but it saved us valuable time and energy in the long run. And we built long-term 5-year plans. The work didn't just end when we'd finished the project. When we'd launched a commercial business, it continued. We were investing in a long-term future, and we tied objective, bonuses and rewards to that long-term value. Of course, there was and is a macro change afoot, and I now work in a very young sector, but one that's reaching maturity and needs change to happen quickly, to keep pace with market growth and market change. Perhaps surprisingly, making change happen in an industry that's renowned for innovation is just as hard as it is in TV. Iteration, innovation are all about change, but the approach to them can become cautious. When times are challenging, it's enormously tempting to revert to what you know, to want to hire some more PLUs who will endorse what we think. Who've done it multiple times before, who feel secure in their sameness. So as we embrace AI and the revolution that it will cause to our working practices, generational shifts and the change they will bring about, the fallout from COVID, how do we ensure that we attract and retain the very best talent that we so desperately need? Well, my third and final C is culture. Given the demographic shifts impacting labour and consumer markets and the lack of ethnic and gender representation across many industries, especially creative ones, companies need proactive approaches to attract, engage and retain workers. Creating an environment where everyone feels they belong requires mutual respect, conscious inclusivity, the ability to encourage candour and to catalyse the creativity grounded in a team's diverse experiences. As we seek to have teams who authentically reflect our customers, whether viewers or players, we need to create a culture of belonging where people feel confident to speak up and be heard. Because fresh perspectives matter. As Matthew Syed said, that collective intelligence emerges not just from the knowledge of individuals, but also from the differences between them. And if we're intent upon answering our most serious questions, from climate change to poverty and curing diseases to designing new products, we need to work with people who think differently and not just accurately. So how do we ensure that everyone feels that they belong, no matter how different they are? Well, it's about ensuring psychological safety so that high-performing teams feel comfortable coming up with mad or wonderful ideas. It's about celebrating failure as well as success. It's about supporting the well-being of teams. It's about creating an environment where everybody's view is heard. So how do we ensure that people feel that they belong in our studios? Well, it definitely starts with listening and truly hearing to make sure we have 2 team advisors. They're both junior. They sit on our senior leadership team, and they ensure that we avoid the groupthink that comes from being of the same age and having the same amount of experience. And as we're still a very male-dominated business, 72%, we created a studio leadership team of middle managers who are reflective of a much broader gender split. And we put huge effort into mental health and well-being with an award-winning well-being champion team made up of 30 volunteers around the business who are all mental health first aiders and who run talks and drop-in sessions where people can share challenges and information. I have honestly never worked in an environment where it is so acceptable to talk about mental health. Our hybrid work policy brings the best of both worlds too and supports work-life balance. We ensure our office environment welcomes all with a faith room, a calm room and quiet areas. And interestingly, none of these initiatives are started or sustained top down. They are all managed laterally around our business and from all different directions. By creating psychologically safe team environments, managers can build trust for welcoming broader perspectives, new ideas and dissenting positions without judgment, and avoid the inertia of groupthink. At the end of the day, it all comes down to respect. Respecting others' views, valuing difference, and celebrating the creativity that difference brings. So what does that mean for you, for students and for universities? Well, when I was at school, teacher literally did know best. But now information is everywhere, in the palm of everyone's hand. In a world where ChatGPT can pretty much answer any question known to man, there is a risk in the ultimate groupthink. Won't answer it very well, but that's another story. I believe what matters most is how we form connections, relationships and ideas, because the alchemy of innovation comes from difference. So for me, the greatest attribute for career success is curiosity, the desire to know what others think and feel, and the ability to listen and hear. Critical listening will be increasingly important. Creativity and innovation come from bringing different voices together. I am very much looking forward to working with you all, and most importantly, I'm very much looking forward to learning a great deal. So thank you very much.